Hey everyone, welcome to today's analysis for November 7th. Today there's several pairs that are touching critical levels and are likely to make a reaction off those levels in the very near future. And so we're going to take a look at a few of those pairs, and I'm going to give you my opinion about what to expect and what to do depending on how they react to those levels, so we can get an idea of what might be coming over the next few days. Alright, before we get into those technical signs, let's take a look at the news to see how that might factor into how they react at these levels. Alright guys, so as far as tomorrow's concerned, we have quite a bit of red tag news. The main things that you'll see here are the 7 a.m. pound news and then some 8:30 a.m. news, which is trade balance and unemployment claims because it's Thursday. Okay, so of course those are red tagged events for the US dollar that will certainly have an effect on these levels that we're talking about. Oftentimes it's news that either creates a very strong bounce off a certain area or does the opposite and actually pushes price through a certain area. So news can play a major role in these areas, and we're going to talk about that as we get further into the technical side of analysis a little bit later on. Also, we do have some odd news, which is at 7:30 p.m. That's Eastern Standard Time, and you'll definitely want to pay attention to that announcement as well. Let's also take a look at our terms before we jump into the charts. Alrighty, and these are the terms basically saying that we're not licensed or registered to provide investment advice, and that the daily analysis is for your educational purposes only. So we're not telling you what to do with your money. We're only giving you an education based on how we perceive the markets. Alright, if you need to pause the video and read through those thoroughly, please do that. I'm going to go ahead and get into the charts at this point in time. Again, the euro dollar is the first pair that we're going to look at, and obviously a lot of factors coming in here on the euro dollar. We have the long-term downtrend, which we've mentioned, coming from the break of this area. When we first broke through this area, price was bearish for quite some time, and then of course starting in July the euro started rebounding pretty heavily. Now we're in an area where it didn't get up to quite previous highs like in this area, but did start heading down again, and now this trend line obviously is coming back into play. So the question is, how is it going to react to this trend line? Let me zoom in on this a little bit and give you an idea of what I'm expecting. Alright guys, so on a closer look, you can see that this is the wedge that we looked at from that outside view that price was kind of bouncing in for a while before it broke through with a pretty strong candle just a few days ago. And if you remember in yesterday's analysis, we talked about price getting near this area and kind of what to expect when it gets to that area. Now, the thing that I'm keeping most important in my own mind is that we're still in a downtrend, and that this level, even though it is a strong level, is a downward moving trend line. In other words, even though it does cause price to react and even bounce off of it, the line itself is actually still pulling price lower. So, technically speaking, when price action bounces off of a downtrend line, it should have a relatively small bounce and then a continuation of that line, because the slope of a downtrend is supposed to continue when you're talking about a technical trend. So, obviously, the market doesn't work like that. It's not that clean and easy. But from a technical aspect, that's how trading, the markets is supposed to work. And so, with that said, typically when price bounces off a downward trend line and it's moving in the downward direction, you expect a small bounce and continuation on top of that trend. Now, there's also the potential that will break below the trend line and actually continue the downtrend at a steeper rate. Now, if that happens, that's obviously even better for shorts because, again, it steepens the trend and creates more momentum in the bearish direction. When we talked about this before, I said there's a lot of factors playing in. There's a lot of areas kind of crowded together in the euro dollar, which makes it a little bit tricky to trade. But the one thing to keep in mind is that when you're bouncing off a downward trend line and there's already downward pressure moving it toward that area in the first place, shorts are going to be your friend typically in that area. There's going to be there's going to be long setups, of course. There always will be, no matter what price is doing. There's going to be a long and a short setup on one time frame or another. But when the price is moving down, when it's reacting off a trend line that's already a long-term trend line moving in that downward direction, typically short entries are going to be the bias that you want because they're just higher probability in nature when you have this backing you up. So that's what I'm anticipating, and that's how I'm planning on playing the euro dollar. Again, I'm not going to be shorting now because I'm waiting for this bounce, however big it may be. But then I'll look for shorts back into the trend line and hopefully, if we get a strong and consistent trend for a while, selling the pullbacks like this will be a strategy that we can trade for a few weeks or even months to come, which is a great situation to be in. So that's my overall analysis on the euro dollar. I think there's a lot of short potential if it takes this this trend line and really continues playing right off that trend line. That's going to give us a lot of good setups and opportunities, and that's what we always look for when we're trading, is those clear, crisp, technically sound opportunities. So hopefully the euro dollar will give us those. It's not set yet, but I think we'll know kind of in a few days how this thing is going to shape out and be able to either take advantage of it or just keep our hands off of it. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just keep your hands off a trade, but oftentimes things will work out pretty much how you technically expect, and you can take advantage of it. So that's what we'll hope for, and of course I will keep you updated on that as price action continues to move here on the euro dollar. I'm just going to touch very briefly on the pound dollar because this is something that we've already talked about. The downward trend is still obviously intact, but it appears that the downtrend is losing momentum, which I talked about. It's rounding up and appears to be losing momentum, which is what we talked about. So I just wanted to call your attention to today's daily bar and let you know that it obviously didn't really make much ground in either direction. So the pound dollar, again, is still in a waiting game. If you're waiting for a technically sound trend setup, pound dollar still is not making a move, whether it's coming back up to test this or continue and make this trend steeper. Still a waiting game for the pound dollar in that sense. Okay, we also have the AUD dollar, which again I won't take much time on, but I wanted to call your attention to a few simple things. Number one, we're still working on this trend toward the top of this area. Anywhere in this zone is in play for the AUD dollar as it moves up in terms of where your target might be. AUD dollar did make a higher high here. Okay, so this little trending move is still intact. This was the previous high. Closed below that, and of course price even reached a much higher high up here. So looks like price is trying to pull back into this level again. If it gets within this these parallel lines here, this would typically be your buy zone as it moves back and then looks to slingshot back up toward a higher high. So that's a very real potential with the AUD. Keep that in mind, and then of course just keep the idea of waiting for price action to also be in line with a general trade. So for instance, if you have tons of momentum pushing bearishly back down into here, don't just buy it because it gets in this area. You also need some price action signals to confirm that that bias that's going to continue the trend, not just the idea that price gets back in that area. Okay, so I'm thinking that the AUD dollar, assuming that it comes back and shows a solid price action symbol that it's moving back up, is going to be a pair that we can continue to trade until it gets up in this area. So that's my bias on the AUD. I think that it's shown relatively good consistency, even though there has not been massive bars. Still showed good consistency to the bullish direction, and each pullback seems to provide a new opportunity for a higher high to the upside. So I'm going to continue to play that idea on the AUD dollar until it quits working. I think that's really all you can do in these situations. So keep an eye out for that on the AUD. Interesting thing to note on the euro pound, that price never really did touch this trend line before being pretty bearish today. So relatively surprising to me. I was expecting price to at least come up and bounce off this trend before making a move either up or down. However, price never really did. So we're still in an area of confusion and indecision. If you remember yesterday, I talked about before it takes out this low, we're still technically in an uptrend. So I'm not calling shorts right now. But it does look like it doesn't want to burst back into the uptrend with any kind of momentum, which is I was kind of hoping for, as you guys probably know, because I talked about the niceness of having a good trend in the market that you can kind of count on, which is how euro pound was running for a while. But right now it's not appearing to do that. So more indecision in my opinion. Until it breaks this area, I'm not going to be calling shorts. But of course, until it breaks this area, I'm not going to be calling longs. So either way, no good trade opportunities that I see. Euro pound, just like pound dollar and just like AUD dollar, is going to be a waiting game until you get the setup that actually conforms to your bias. And for me, that setup will either occur with a break of this level to the downside or a break of this level to the upside. And that's what I'm waiting for in the euro pound. Alrighty guys, and the last pair I wanted to cover today was the euro AUD. And this is kind of an opportunity for me to pat myself on the back a little bit, because this is one we talked about where, was a technically sound call, and we really got that right. Notice that this was the area that I mentioned a while ago where it broke through that 38.2 level, and I said that looks to have some bearish momentum, assuming that that it closed below the 38.2 level on the daily, which it did. That there's a high likelihood that we'd get down to the 50 area, and that's exactly where price came to tonight, or today, I should say. So a nice move there, and one that was a pretty simple trade, really. Not a lot of complexity in that trade, but it moved a little over 130 pips. Or mine's showing about 127 pips, but a decent move for the EUROAUD, and obviously you wouldn't have needed a great big stop to take the trade. So hopefully a lot of you took advantage of that when we talked about that trade a few days ago. Lately the markets have been tricky, and a lot of things that I've been calling in terms of direction have been either having to wait a really long time for them to formulate, or some of them I've just been really off on, like that euro pound, assuming that trend was going to continue. I was just totally wrong about that. So the EUROAUD was one that was nice to be actually right on. And of course, trading comes down to taking advantage of the times where your bias is right and not getting burnt too bad on the times when you're wrong. Because of course, as you know, if you've been trading for any length of time, that you're going to have a lot of losses. That you can't just be right all the time in Forex trading. It's not that simple. But the key is to not let those losses kill you, but to really take advantage of it when your bias is right. So hopefully some of you guys took advantage of this EUROAUD. I'm not convinced that it's not going to continue, heading down. But the 50 level is, of course, going to be, a pretty big area where you're likely to see at least a bounce. As for me, I think that, if it bounces back up to 38.2 and then starts heading down again, for instance, if it pops all the way back up in this area and then makes another move to the downside, that the second move to the downside is pretty likely to actually break right through the 50 and head to our next major level, which of course would provide another great opportunity on the EUROAUD. Of course, the other thing about the EUROAUD that's great to trade is that you get positive swap when you're shorting it. The interest is good, so you're getting rollover, and also a pair like the EUROAUD that's moved down so consistently over months and years. It's always nice just to be on the overwhelming side of the trade in terms of long-term, trading bias. So EUROAUD short, great trade. Please comment if you took advantage of that trade. I'd love to get that feedback and that testimonial. And I'll work with you guys tomorrow as this either makes its bounce or makes a break or whatever. I'll work with you guys tomorrow in terms of what to expect or how to manage a trade if you are already short and holding on to that. All of that information, depending on, if I'm getting feedback that you are in a live trade, I'd love to work with you on the best way to manage that. All right, thanks again for stopping by for the analysis today. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow, and I'll talk to you soon.